Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery. Every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, we follow Hercule Poirot as he steps into the heart of a frozen European town, where silence hides more than snow. A man vanished on the canal when the ice was still thin, and by morning, the footprints that led to the water had frozen solid, sealing the mystery beneath the surface. Stay with me till the end, because what Poirot discovers isn't buried in the ice. It's hidden in the reflection staring back at him. So, straighten your tie, let the chill settle in, and prepare your little gray cells, because today's case is Hercule Poirot and the disappearance on the frozen canal. Chapter 1. The frozen canal. It was a morning of unusual stillness in the small town of Vevey, Switzerland. The crisp winter air hung in the atmosphere like a well-worn coat, heavy, quiet, and oddly soothing. A delicate layer of frost blanketed the rooftops, while the sky, though blue, lacked the usual vibrancy, as though the sun had forgotten its intensity. Snowflakes, light as feathers, descended slowly to the earth, completing a picture of serenity that seemed at odds with the drama that had begun to unfold. A thick layer of ice had formed on the canal that ran along the outskirts of town. The ice, now frozen hard and smooth as glass, stretched far and wide, creating a mirror-like surface that reflected the village's quaint buildings and the bare trees on either side. Normally, the sight would have brought the residents out, eager for their winter pastime, ice skating, sliding across the glistening surface with grace and ease. But today was different. As the clock struck 9, a flurry of hurried footsteps echoed along the canal's edge. Inspector Raymond Dufresne, his face flushed from the cold, was carefully making his way toward the scene of an unsettling discovery. Behind him, a procession of local officials, including the town's mayor, accompanied him, their breaths visible in the air as they whispered amongst themselves. The canal, usually a source of joy and entertainment, had become the backdrop for something far darker. In the middle of the frozen stretch of water lay a body, motionless, its form half covered by a light dusting of snow. The victim, a man in his mid-30s, was dressed in a heavy winter coat, his face pale, his eyes wide open, and his expression frozen in terror. The chilling silence of the scene was broken only by the distant calls of a few late birds, returning to their nests. The town's mayor, Monsieur Lambert, could hardly suppress his shock as he approached the body, his eyes scanning the surrounding area in disbelief. "This is a terrible, terrible thing," he murmured under his breath, his voice quivering with the weight of the discovery. Dufresne knelt beside the body, examining it carefully. There were no obvious signs of violence, no blood or wounds that might indicate a struggle. Yet, the look on the man's face, a mixture of fear and confusion, spoke volumes. It was as though he had been caught in the act of witnessing something so horrific that it stole the life right from him. "There's no sign of what caused his death," Dufresne muttered. "No wounds, no visible injuries. He's frozen, yes, but nothing to explain the look on his face." As he stood, brushing the snow from his knees, Dufresne glanced toward the assembled group, his eyes narrowing slightly. Something didn't sit right. His instincts told him that this was no accident, no random fall or misstep. This was murder, plain and simple. "Have you identified him?" the mayor asked, his voice edged with concern. Dufresne paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on the body. "Not yet, but the coat he's wearing, it's foreign. Looks like it came from the boutique on Rue des Marchands. I'll send someone to inquire. We'll know soon enough." At that moment, a figure appeared at the far end of the canal, walking toward them with purpose. The tall, slender form was unmistakable, the silhouette cut through the snowy haze like a sharp blade. It was none other than Hercule Poirot, the famous Belgian detective, whose presence in Vevey had been a recent but welcome addition. "Ah, Inspector Dufresne," Poirot's voice rang out with its characteristic precision, drawing the attention of the group. His tone was polite but firm, betraying no trace of the cold that surrounded them. "It seems we have a mystery on our hands, no?" The friend's eyes widened in surprise, and the mayor quickly stepped forward to greet the detective. "Poirot, I didn't expect you to arrive so soon. We've found a body. There's no explanation for it yet. Just a man, frozen on the canal." Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the scene with practiced precision. His gaze flickered from the body to the tracks in the snow surrounding it. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading in or out of the area. It was as if the man had simply appeared, a victim of some unseen force. "Is this your first visit to Vevey, mon ami?" Poirot asked casually, his gaze still fixed on the body. "A place of great beauty, no. But sometimes, even in the most peaceful of places, darkness lurks in unexpected corners." The mayor and Dufresne exchanged nervous glances. Poirot's reputation was well known, but they had not yet considered involving him in this case. "Of course," the mayor stammered, trying to regain his composure, "but we've not yet discovered any real evidence. You see, the man's identity is unknown, and there's no sign of who might have done this." Poirot turned his attention back to the body, his sharp mind already piecing together fragments of the puzzle. "Ah, you are missing something, mon ami," Poirot said softly, but with a glint of certainty in his voice. "You are so focused on what is before you that you forget to look beyond it. It is not the man who has disappeared, but the mystery itself." Dufresne's confusion was palpable, and the mayor looked to Poirot for further clarification. "You must examine everything, not just the obvious," Poirot continued, his eyes narrowing as he crouched beside the body, carefully examining the man's coat. "The details, they are the key, and they will tell us not just how he died, but who he was." Dufresne, though still baffled, nodded. "You believe it's murder, then?" Poirot smiled slightly. "Indeed, but murder is but a small part of the story. The greater question is, why?" With that, Poirot stood, his sharp gaze taking in the entire scene once again. He had already begun to weave the threads of the mystery in his mind, the pieces slowly falling into place. This was no ordinary crime, it was a puzzle, and Poirot was already determined to solve it. "Let us begin," he said, as he motioned for the others to follow him. "I believe we have much to uncover, n'est-ce pas?" The mystery of the frozen canal had only just begun. Chapter 2. The first crisp morning had grown colder as Poirot, accompanied by Inspector Dufresne and Mayor Lambert, continued to scrutinize the scene of the crime. The body was carefully removed from the ice, a stretcher carrying it away, while the group remained by the canal. Poirot stood motionless for a moment, eyes sharp, taking in every detail. The scene had an air of eeriness, the stark silence broken only by the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots, and the occasional distant sound of an axe splitting wood somewhere in the village. Despite the tranquil surroundings, Poirot's mind worked swiftly, processing the data before him. "Come, mon ami," Poirot called to Dufresne, his eyes narrowing at the path where the victim's body had been discovered. "I will need you to answer some questions now." Dufresne nodded, his breath forming visible puffs in the crisp air. "What is it, Poirot?" Poirot gestured toward the surrounding area, his sharp gaze scanning the scene. "The body was found here, on the ice, yes? But observe the small details, those tell a different story than what you have assumed." "Details?" Dufresne's voice wavered slightly as he tried to follow Poirot's line of thought. Poirot's eyes flicked to the tracks in the snow, the subtle indentations along the canal's frozen edge. The prints were small and delicate, the kind left by someone moving cautiously. "Tell me, Inspector, how did the victim end up here? Why would someone leave the warmth of a fire to walk out onto the ice?" Dufresne scratched his chin, considering the question. Perhaps he was trying to escape, but there's no sign of a struggle. No footprints that lead anywhere significant. Poirot's lips curved into a thin smile, though there was no humor in it. Ah, but there is a struggle, mon ami, though it is hidden. The footprints do not lead to or from the scene. They remain close to the body. Someone was here, but the ice was not the place for them to walk, not unless. Poirot's voice trailed off, but Dufresne had already caught the implication. He stepped forward and leaned down to examine the prints with a fresh perspective. They were faint, almost imperceptible in places, as though the person had walked in a hesitant, almost cautious manner, never straying far from the spot where the body was discovered. "I see," Dufresne muttered, his expression hardening as the realization began to form. Someone was here, but they didn't move far. "Exactly," Poirot affirmed, his voice quiet, but filled with the weight of understanding. Someone was watching, or waiting for the victim to come to them, perhaps, but they never strayed beyond this line. The detective rose and began to move closer to the frozen canal. He stopped just short of the edge, his eyes scanning every inch of the area. There, barely visible beneath the surface of the ice, Poirot spotted something, a faint outline in the ice, as though something had been left behind before it had been covered by a layer of snow. He knelt, lifting a small brush from his pocket and delicately clearing away the snow to reveal a dark, discolored patch on the ice. It was subtle, but there it was, an irregularity in the otherwise smooth surface. Poirot's fingers hovered over the patch, and with a slight twist of his wrist, he carefully scraped away a thin layer of ice, revealing a small object embedded just beneath the surface. Dufresne watched, curiosity rising. "What is it, Poirot?" Poirot took a moment, his fingers brushing delicately against the object, before he slowly lifted it from its icy prison. It was a small silver cufflink, tarnished with age and dusted with frost. He held it up for the others to see. "This, my friend, is the first clue," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "The cufflink is unique, with intricate engravings. It is a distinctive item, a piece of jewelry belonging to a man who would not let it slip so easily." "But how did it get here?" Dufresne asked, puzzled. "Ah." Poirot's lips parted slightly in a knowing smile. "That is the question," Nest's pause. "The answer is in the details. The victim was not alone on that ice. This cufflink was not lost in an accident. It was deliberately placed here, hidden beneath the ice, as if someone wanted it to be discovered at just the right moment." The mayor, who had been listening quietly up to this point, stepped forward. "Do you believe the victim knew his attacker? Could it have been a robbery gone wrong?" Poirot looked thoughtfully at the cufflink, turning it over in his hand. "No, this is not the act of a simple thief. This is a message, a symbol. Whoever left this behind intended it to be found." Dufresne's eyes widened with realization. "So, you think the victim was targeted? But by whom?" Poirot placed the cufflink carefully into an evidence pouch and stood slowly, his posture regal. "We must look to the other clues. This, mon ami, is not the first key to the mystery. There are more hidden beneath the surface. We must dig deeper." The group fell silent as Poirot's gaze shifted from the frozen canal to the town in the distance. His mind was already working at full capacity, unraveling the mystery in his mind, piecing together the faint trail of clues that would lead to the truth. The mayor stepped back, his breath coming faster. "And what now? What is our next step, Poirot?" Poirot's voice was calm, but filled with the intensity of a man in full command of his thoughts. "We wait, Monsieur Lambert. We wait for the next piece of the puzzle to reveal itself." As Poirot turned to leave, Dufresne followed, the weight of the case pressing on him as the two men walked back toward the town. The frozen canal, once a serene, peaceful place, now felt like a stage set for something far darker, a mystery just beginning to unfold. And as Poirot moved through the snow, he knew with certainty that the truth lay hidden, waiting to be uncovered. Piece by piece, Chapter 3, The gathering of suspects' snow had begun to fall heavier now, casting a quiet pall over the town of Vevey. The air was thick with tension, and the streets seemed eerily deserted, as though the entire village had taken a collective breath and was holding it in. By the time Poirot and Inspector Dufresne had returned to the town, the officials had already made arrangements for the victims' belongings to be retrieved, and the local constables were busy canvassing the surrounding area for any potential witnesses. Poirot had already begun formulating a theory, but he knew better than to rush to conclusions. His method was one of patient observation, patient questioning. A case like this was like an intricate tapestry, and every piece needed to be carefully placed before the whole picture could emerge. They made their way to the town hall, where the investigation was officially taking place. Inside, a group of concerned citizens had gathered, suspects, witnesses, and family members alike. Each of them wore the same expression of unease, but it was clear to Poirot that each one of them was hiding something, whether consciously or not. His mind churned as he studied their faces, taking note of the subtle differences in posture, the flickers of nervousness in their eyes, the carefully controlled body language. The first to be brought before him was Miss Elise Duval, the victim's fiancée, a woman of striking beauty. Her dark hair was pinned up neatly, and she wore a fur-lined coat. Despite the warmth of the room, her eyes, however, were distant, lost in thought. There was something about her that struck Poirot immediately, the tension in her jaw, the way her hands fidgeted with the buttons of her coat. "Miss Duval, I presume?" Poirot asked softly, his eyes locking onto hers with a quiet intensity. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "I am Elise Duval. What happened to Henry?" "It's impossible to believe." Poirot studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Impossible, yes, but the truth often reveals itself in the most unexpected ways. Tell me, Miss Duval, did you notice anything unusual about Henry's behavior recently? Any change in his character, his routine?" She hesitated, her fingers still fidgeting nervously. "No, nothing unusual. He was his usual self. We were planning to marry in the spring, and yet," Poirot continued, "he ends up dead. On the frozen canal, without any explanation, without any warning." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. "Did Henry have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to harm him?" Miss Duval shook her head. "No, he was loved by everyone. He was a respected man, a businessman. He had no enemies." Poirot's eyes flicked to her hands, still nervously twisting her coat. "Are you sure about that, Miss Duval? Everyone has secrets. Some are better at hiding them than others." She seemed taken aback, her lips trembling slightly. "I don't know what you're implying." Poirot studied her closely before speaking again, his tone gentle. "It is simply my job to ask the right questions. Miss Duval, I do not wish to make accusations, but in order to find the truth, I must ask everything." Before she could respond, the door to the room creaked open, and two more figures entered. One was a man in his late 40s, dressed in a worn but dignified suit, Henry's business partner, Monsieur Gaston Lefebvre. The other was a woman, not much older than Miss Duval, but with an air of sophistication about her. She was introduced as Marguerite Lemoine, Henry's longtime secretary. Both carried with them a palpable tension, though they masked it with varying degrees of composure. "Ah, you must be Monsieur Lefebvre and Mademoiselle Lemoine," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he regarded them. "A pleasure to meet you both." Lefebvre offered a curt nod, his face hard and weathered. "We have already been told of the tragedy. I cannot imagine what has happened." Lemoine, on the other hand, was less composed. She wrung her hands nervously as she spoke. "Henry was a good man," she said quickly. "I don't understand. Why would anyone want to hurt him? He was always so kind." Poirot studied both of them in turn. He could tell immediately that there was more beneath the surface than they were willing to reveal. "Tell me," Poirot began, his voice measured. "Did you have any disagreements with Monsieur Henry recently? Any tensions between you?" Lefebvre stiffened at the question, his eyes flicking briefly to Lemoyne before he spoke. "There were no disagreements. We had our differences. Of course, what business partner doesn't? But nothing that would lead to this." Lemoyne's eyes darted toward the window, avoiding Poirot's gaze. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Henry was always so professional. We worked well together." Poirot didn't press them further, but his mind was already racing. Each suspect seemed to have their own story, their own motive, but none of them had yet revealed the full truth. Each of them had their own version of Henry's life, and perhaps their own hidden fears about what might have been happening behind closed doors. As the interviews continued, Poirot noted each subtle reaction, every shifting glance, every deep breath that betrayed nervousness. It was clear that all of them were hiding something. But what? Well, Poirot murmured to himself. This is becoming most interesting. He dismissed them all, allowing them to leave the room one by one, but not without making sure they knew that the investigation was far from over. He could feel the web of deception tightening around them. The truth, however, was still buried beneath layers of lies and half-truths. But Poirot was patient. His little gray cells were already at work, and he would unravel this mystery soon enough. As he walked toward the door, the friend caught up with him, his face a mixture of confusion and frustration. "Do you have any leads, Poirot? Any idea what's really going on here?" Poirot gave a small, cryptic smile. "Inspector, the first steps have been taken, but we are only at the beginning. Each person has their story, but I suspect the truth lies not in what they say, but in what they hide." And with that, Poirot turned to face the next step of his investigation, his mind already calculating the possibilities. The mystery of the frozen canal was far from over. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. The investigation was taking shape, albeit slowly. Each suspect had been questioned, and the initial clues, though suggestive, had not yet painted a clear picture of the crime. The snow had continued to fall through the night, and by the morning, a heavy silence hung over Vevey. The usually lively town felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting for the storm to pass. Poirot, however, was undeterred by the stillness. He had always believed that the answers to any mystery were never as far away as they seemed, and with each passing moment, his confidence grew that he would uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface of this quiet village. That morning, Poirot made his way to the town hall. The room where the investigation had been conducted was dimly lit, with shadows stretching across the floor as the fire in the hearth crackled softly. Inspector Dufresne had already arrived, poring over the evidence, but there was a distracted air about him, as if he were struggling to piece together the scattered fragments of the case. Poirot entered the room quietly, his polished shoes making no sound on the wooden floors. He was immediately struck by the contrast between Dufresne's apparent frustration and his own calm demeanor. Dufresne, Poirot said, his voice smooth and deliberate. "You look as though you have not slept." The inspector looked up, his face showing signs of weariness. "It's all so confusing, Poirot. I can't seem to make sense of any of it. The suspects all claim they had no reason to harm Henry, and yet," Poirot held up a hand, signaling Dufresne to pause. "The mind can play tricks, mon ami. It is not the why that matters now, it is the how and when. Every story has a crack in it, and it is through these cracks that we will see the light." Dufresne's brow furrowed as he tried to digest Poirot's words. "I don't understand." Poirot smiled gently, stepping further into the room. "Let us begin with the simplest question, Inspector. What was Henry doing on the ice that night?" Dufresne opened his mouth to speak but stopped, his eyes widening as if a realization had struck him. "That's the question, isn't it? We assumed that he was simply out for a walk or maybe skating. But why the canal? Poirot nodded, his eyes glittering with the thrill of the chase. Exactly. He was a man of habit, yes. What would have taken him to the ice that night? Was he alone? Or was he there for a reason? The inspector shook his head in frustration. The lack of witnesses is maddening. No one saw him leave. No one saw anyone near the canal. That is why, Poirot said slowly, we must look beyond the obvious. The victim did not simply wander onto the ice. There was something that drew him there. Poirot's words hung in the air as he paced the room, his mind already connecting the dots. Tell me, Dufresne, he said, pausing and turning to face the inspector. What do you know of Monsieur Gaston Lefebvre and Mademoiselle Marguerite Lemoine? Dufresne glanced down at the notes in front of him. Lefebvre is Henry's business partner, a man of few words. As for Lemoine, she was Henry's secretary. She's young, well-spoken, but there's something about her. She's nervous, almost too eager to please. Poirot's lips curled into a slight smile. Ah, nervousness can be the most telling sign. It hides much, does it not? Dufresne frowned. You think they know something? But they've been so open. No one is hiding anything, Poirot. Not hiding, Poirot corrected, but concealing. There is a difference. They do not yet understand that they are trapped in their own stories. The truth is already inside them, but they do not know it. The inspector stood up, clearly baffled. But how do you propose we proceed? We have no clear evidence, no motive, and the suspects are all, well, they're all perfectly ordinary. Poirot stopped and turned to Dufresne, his gaze penetrating. Nothing is ordinary in a mystery, my friend. Nothing is as it seems. But I will give you a clue, and it lies in the way they speak. Listen to the words they use, not just the content, but the way they say them. Dufresne looked at Poirot, still unsure. You're saying we need to question them again? Poirot smiled softly. No, not yet. We must allow them to think they are free. They must believe that the case is closed, that they are no longer suspects. Only then will they reveal their true selves. Poirot's calm certainty had a profound effect on Dufresne. The inspector began to pace, his mind processing the detective's words. You're suggesting we let them go, for now, but keep them under observation. Precisely, Poirot affirmed. But there is more. The game has only just begun. We will uncover their lies, but in order to do so, we must first understand them completely. Dufresne nodded slowly, starting to see the brilliance of Poirot's approach. I see. We give them room to make a mistake. We don't pressure them. Poirot raised a finger, his eyes gleaming with the intensity of his thought process. Indeed, pressure creates walls. We need to create space for the truth to slip through. The inspector looked at Poirot with new respect, the weight of the investigation starting to lift as the detective's calm, methodical approach began to make sense. With a final glance at the town hall, Poirot turned to Dufresne. Now, let us go and examine the scene once more. There is something we have missed, something only we can see. And so, with Poirot's guidance, the investigation would continue, inching closer to the truth that lay buried beneath the ice, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Investigation was in its early stages, and Poirot's calm, deliberate approach had already begun to unravel the first threads of a larger, more intricate tapestry. Inspector Dufresne, now under Poirot's watchful guidance, had begun to see the value in the detective's unconventional methods. The suspects, for the time being, had been allowed their peace, but Poirot's subtle strategy was beginning to take shape. The next step was simple yet crucial: interviews. The suspects were assembled again, this time in the warmth of the town hall. The fire crackled in the hearth, the occasional pop of burning wood adding a strange warmth to the otherwise cold atmosphere. Despite the comfort, there was no hiding the undercurrent of tension in the room. The individuals present, each with their own motives, Their own stories were no longer in the safety of their first defenses. Now they were on the precipice of discovery. Poirot stood at the front of the room, his small frame imposing in its own right. The mayor, Dufresne, and a handful of town officials sat quietly behind him. The rest of the room was filled with the usual suspects: Miss Duval, Monsieur Lefebvre, Mademoiselle Lemoyne, and others who had been close to Henry. Each one was here for their own reason, and Poirot was determined to find out exactly why. The first interview began with Miss Elise Duval. Her pale face was even paler in the light of the fire, her dark eyes guarded but restless. Poirot's sharp gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, noting the slight trembling of her hands as she smoothed down her dress. There was something beneath her composed exterior, an undercurrent of anxiety that was not as easily masked as she had hoped. Miss Duval, Poirot began, his voice calm and measured. "Thank you for joining us again. I trust you have had time to reflect on your answers from yesterday." She nodded, her posture stiff as she avoided making direct eye contact. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I have already told you everything I know." "Indeed," Poirot replied, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing as he watched her closely. "But I wonder, Miss Duval, how well can we ever know the truth? You say you were to marry Monsieur Henry in the spring. Such a future must have been a great source of joy to you." Her lips parted slightly, as though a flicker of something regret perhaps passed through her. "Yes, it was." "Tell me, Miss Duval," Poirot continued, "did you ever speak to Monsieur Henry about his business affairs? About his relationship with Monsieur Lefebvre, perhaps?" Her eyes flickered, the faintest sign of discomfort. "No, Henry and I did not discuss business. That was his domain. I preferred not to worry about such things." Poirot paused, giving her a moment to digest his words. "Yet, I must ask, do you know if there were any financial troubles between Monsieur Henry and Monsieur Lefebvre? Was there any disagreement over money, perhaps?" Miss Duval hesitated. Her gaze shifted nervously to the other suspects sitting quietly in the back of the room. Poirot saw at the shift in her expression. It was subtle but unmistakable. "No," she said at last, her voice faltering slightly. "No, nothing like that. They were friends." "Friends," Poirot echoed, his tone neutral but knowing. "And you have no idea what caused Henry to take that walk on the ice?" I do not," Miss Duval replied quickly, almost too quickly. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing further. He had learned something important. Her discomfort was not about the truth of the facts, but something more hidden. The connection between her and the others was worth considering. But there was a more pressing matter at hand. Next, Monsieur Lefebvre was brought forward. He entered the room with a quiet confidence, his eyes sharp and focused. Despite his calm demeanor, Poirot noticed the stiff set of his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. The man was trying very hard to appear unaffected, but Poirot knew better. "Monsieur Lefebvre." Poirot greeted him, his voice smooth. "You and Monsieur Henry shared a long history, yes?" Lefebvre nodded, his eyes cool. "We were business partners for over 10 years. We built this company together, and you would say that you had no disagreements, no tensions in recent months." Lefebvre's lips curled into a thin smile. "We had disagreements, of course. What business partnership doesn't? But none that would lead to this." He gestured toward the empty chair where Henry's body had once been. "And yet," Poirot pressed, "you did not speak to anyone about your differences? No plans to part ways?" Lefebvre shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "No, nothing like that. Business is business. It has its ups and downs. Henry and I were fine." Poirot let the silence linger for a moment before he continued, his gaze fixed on Lefebvre. "It is curious, isn't it, Monsieur Lefebvre? You both were so very fine, yet here we are, and Henry is dead. You, of course, had no reason to harm him?" Lefebvre's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, He merely met Poirot's gaze, his eyes steely. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I had no reason." Poirot nodded slowly. "I see. You would say that." As Lefebvre left, Mademoiselle Lemoyne was next in line. She entered with a graceful poise, but Poirot was quick to notice the slight tremor in her hands. Her face was carefully neutral, but her eyes betrayed her unease. "Mademoiselle Lemoyne," Poirot began, his voice soft yet insistent. "Tell me, what do you think of Henry's death? Did it surprise you?" Her gaze darted briefly toward the others before she answered, her voice steady but lacking conviction. "Yes, of course I never expected this." Poirot leaned in slightly. "Did you ever argue with him? Perhaps about his behavior, or the way he handled his business?" She shook her head quickly, almost too quickly. "No, Henry was always professional. I respected him." Poirot studied her closely. There was something in her expression, something he couldn't quite place, but it would require more time to uncover. He had already learned that the truth was rarely spoken in the first attempt. With that, the interviews continued, and Poirot made mental notes, carefully observing every word, every gesture, every subtle shift in posture. Each suspect was a part of the puzzle, but none of them had yet provided the key. For now, he had only the faintest hints. But Poirot was patient. He would wait for the moment when the truth, hidden beneath the layers, finally revealed itself. Chapter 6. First false lead. Evening had settled over Vevey, casting long shadows over the town. Inside the town hall, the investigation continued. Poirot stood by the window, staring at the darkening canal, the reflection of the snow-covered buildings seeming almost to mock the murder that had occurred there. He was deep in thought, allowing the puzzle to grow clearer with each passing moment. Inspector Dufresne entered the room, his face creased with concern. He was holding a file, his hands shaking slightly as he handed it to Poirot. "Poirot," Dufresne said, voice lowered, "we may have something. A lead, though it doesn't seem to fit." Poirot turned, his expression unreadable. "A lead? Tell me more, mon ami." Dufresne opened the file. "We received a tip today. A witness reported seeing a man matching Lefebvre's description near the canal last night, just after Henry's body was discovered. The witness said Lefebvre was acting suspiciously, looking around as though trying to avoid being seen." Poirot's interest piqued. "Lefebvre, you say? That is interesting indeed. And this man, did he see Lefebvre at the scene of the crime?" Dufresne shook his head. "No, but he was near the canal. The witness saw him walking quickly, but was too far to get a clear look. He said Lefebvre seemed nervous, but that's all we have." Poirot leaned over the file, his fingers skimming the photographs and reports. "This may be significant," Poirot mused, "but we must not jump to conclusions. A single witness is not enough to seal a man's fate." "Then you don't think it's important?" Dufresne asked, confused. Poirot turned his gaze to the inspector. "Not that I don't think it is important, mon ami, but we must ask, why was Lefebvre in the vicinity? Why, if he were innocent, would he act so? This could be the lead we need, or it could be a trap. We must investigate, but carefully." Dufresne rubbed his temples, clearly exhausted. "So what should we do now?" Poirot stepped back from the table, his mind already processing the new information. "We continue as we have. We observe. The timing of this report is curious, is it not? It fits neatly into our investigation, but it is still just a fragment of the story. We must be sure before making a move. But Lefebvre is the most likely suspect right now," Dufresne said, his voice tinged with frustration. "We know he was close to Henry, and now this witness has put him near the scene of the crime." Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes sparkling with the thrill of the chase. "That may be, Inspector, but do not be misled by appearances. I suspect there is more to this than we are seeing. We cannot ignore this lead, but we must not let it blind us to other possibilities, Dufresne." though still somewhat uncertain, nodded slowly. "So we wait and observe Lefebvre closely?" "Exactly," Poirot affirmed. "We let Monsieur Lefebvre believe we are focused on other things. Let him think the investigation has taken a certain direction. And then, when he least expects it, we will uncover the truth." Dufresne looked at Poirot with renewed respect. "I see. You think Lefebvre's involvement is part of a larger scheme." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "I believe we are being guided toward a false conclusion. Let us not be so hasty to make assumptions. We will watch, and when the time is right, we will strike." The two men fell silent as Poirot's mind continued to churn. The lead was intriguing, but Poirot knew better than to rush into an arrest or accusation without more concrete evidence. It was a game of patience. He would let the suspects continue their charade while he moved steadily closer to the truth. As the evening wore on, Poirot and Dufresne reviewed the facts once more. The room was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of paper and the crackle of the fire. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in a quiet, oppressive silence. Poirot stood, walking toward the window once more. He gazed out at the darkened canal, his mind working relentlessly. The truth, he knew, was buried somewhere in the intricate web of lies and deception. His job was not to rush to conclusions, but to allow the lies to unfold and reveal themselves. Tomorrow, the investigation will continue, and with each passing moment, Poirot was certain they were getting closer to the truth. For now, though, he would wait. With one final glance out the window, Poirot turned to Dufresne. "Tomorrow, we begin anew. We will uncover the true nature of this crime, mon ami. But we must proceed with caution." Dufresne nodded, understanding the detective's strategy. "I trust your judgment, Poirot. Let's see where this leads." And so, the investigation continued. But Poirot knew one thing for certain: the first false lead had already been cast, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut next morning arrived with a biting chill that seemed to freeze the very air. The town of Vevey, now fully covered in snow, appeared almost unrecognizable. The bustling streets were quiet, and the usual hustle of village life was replaced with a heavy, uneasy silence. In the town hall, however, the atmosphere was charged with the anticipation of progress. Poirot's methods were beginning to take shape, and Inspector Dufresne, though still unsure of some details, was starting to follow the detective's logic. Poirot sat at the long table in the town hall, his small hands folded in front of him. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, but its warmth did little to dispel the tension in the room. Dufresne sat across from him, his eyes scanning through the latest reports, his mind clearly still preoccupied with the false lead from the previous day. Poirot, however, was already focusing on a new aspect of the investigation, one that would require his most delicate touch. "We have made some progress, Dufresne," Poirot began, his voice calm, betraying none of the urgency in his thoughts. "But now we must turn our attention to the psychology of the suspects." Dufresne looked up, confused. "Psychology, Poirot? What do you mean?" Poirot smiled faintly. "In every case, there is a moment when a suspect begins to crack, when they feel the pressure of suspicion tightening around them. It is then that they make mistakes, small ones usually, but they are revealing nonetheless. We must apply that pressure carefully." Dufresne's frown deepened. "So you want to push them? Force them to slip up?" "Not force," Poirot corrected gently. "We merely need to create the right environment for them to expose themselves. Human nature is full of contradictions, and contradictions are what we seek." The door to the hall creaked open, and the first of the suspects entered. Monsieur Lefebvre. He looked more composed than before, his usually sharp eyes now betraying a hint of wariness as he crossed the room. Poirot's gaze remained fixed on him, analyzing every movement, every subtle gesture. Lefebvre took a seat without a word, his posture rigid. Poirot, ever the master of subtlety, made no immediate move to address him. Instead, he sat back in his chair and waited for the tension to build. Watching the way Lefebvre's gaze flickered around the room, the silence was broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Poirot let the moment stretch, allowing the discomfort to settle in. Then, finally, he spoke. "Monsieur Lefebvre," Poirot began in a tone that was as calm as a still lake. "You have been quiet lately, non? You were so assertive yesterday. What has changed?" Lefebvre shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming nervously against the armrest. I am not sure what you mean." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Ah, but of course you do. Yesterday you were quick to speak, quick to defend yourself. Today, however, you are hesitant. You are unsure. What has caused this change?" Lefebvre opened his mouth, but no words came out. Poirot could see the flicker of doubt in the man's eyes, the crack in the armor. He had touched something deep within him, and it was beginning to unravel. But Poirot did not press further yet. He was playing a delicate game, and the timing had to be perfect. Instead, Poirot allowed the silence to return, leaving Lefebvre to stew in his own discomfort. The tension in the room was palpable now, and Poirot could feel it building. He let the moments drag on, each one making Lefebvre more aware of his own vulnerability. Finally, Lefebvre cleared his throat. "I don't know what you want from me, Poirot. I told you everything I knew. I have nothing to hide, nothing to hide." Poirot repeated, his voice smooth. "But surely, Monsieur Lefebvre, there is something more. A man who claims to have no enemies, a man who is so fine, as you said yesterday, cannot be so unshaken by the death of his business partner. It is unnatural, don't you think?" Lefebvre's hands clenched into fists. His mouth tightened, and for a brief moment, Poirot saw something fleeting but undeniable. Fear, the fear of being exposed, the fear of being caught in a lie. Lefebvre knew that Poirot was not finished with him. Perhaps, Lefebvre muttered, his voice low, "I have been too confident." Poirot's eyes flicked toward him, the corners of his mouth curling into a knowing smile. "Ah, Monsieur Lefebvre, you are much more insightful than you let on." The sudden shift in Lefebvre's demeanor told Poirot everything he needed to know. The man was starting to crack, but there was still more to uncover. Poirot could not let this lead slip by. He leaned forward, his voice now a whisper that barely traveled beyond the table. "And what of Mademoiselle Lemoine?" Poirot asked. "She is close to you, is she not? Perhaps she knows something about your relationship with Henry that we do not?" Lefebvre stiffened at the mention of Lemoine's name. He glanced quickly toward the door, his eyes betraying a flash of discomfort. Poirot had hit a nerve. "You are very observant, Poirot," Lefebvre replied, his voice faltering. "But Mademoiselle Lemoine is not involved in this. She has nothing to do with Henry's death." Poirot did not respond immediately. He simply watched Lefebvre, his expression unreadable. Lefebvre's reaction had spoken volumes. The web was becoming tighter, and the connections were beginning to form. But for now, Poirot said nothing further. "Very well," Poirot said, his tone returning to its usual calm. "We will continue with our investigation. But be assured, Monsieur Lefebvre, we are watching, and the truth always finds a way to reveal itself." As Lefebvre left the room, Poirot exchanged a brief glance with Dufresne. The inspector was still uncertain, but Poirot knew they were close. The game had only just begun, but the psychological pressure was starting to have its effect. The cracks were appearing, and soon, the truth would be exposed. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. Days following the interview with Lefebvre had been quiet, but Poirot knew better than to mistake the calm for a resolution. He had observed the cracks in Lefebvre's carefully constructed facade, but they were not enough. The pressure was building, but it was not yet the right time to break him completely. For now, Poirot's focus shifted to other potential avenues, ones that might provide the missing piece of the puzzle. That afternoon, Poirot and Inspector Dufresne sat in the town hall, reviewing the case once more. The room, though warm from the fire, felt suffocating. Poirot had asked for a second round of interviews with all the suspects, and the tension was beginning to build again. But Poirot knew that patience was his greatest ally in these moments. As the clock ticked on, the door opened, and the town constable entered with an unexpected message. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Dufresne, we've found something," the constable said, his voice slightly breathless. Poirot looked up, intrigued. "Found something, you say? What is it?" The constable handed over a small piece of parchment. It was folded neatly and had clearly been hastily written, with smudges of ink. "This was discovered in the fireplace of the Lemoyne residence, monsieur. We believe it may be of significance." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he unfolded the paper, his fingers delicately smoothing the creases. The words on the page were hurried and fragmented, written in a rushed hand. "The truth lies beneath the surface. You must act quickly. If you wait too long, it will be too late. Lefebvre knows more than he's letting on." Poirot's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Ah, it seems our investigation has taken a sudden turn. The plot thickens, as they say." Dufresne looked over Poirot's shoulder at the note, his face etched with confusion. "What does it mean? Who wrote this?" "That, mon ami," Poirot said thoughtfully, "is the key question. But we cannot ignore the fact that this note was found in Mademoiselle Lemoyne's residence. She has been in the midst of all our suspicions, and now this anonymous warning. A cryptic message. It appears she has been hiding something." Dufresne's brow furrowed. "So you think Lemoyne is involved?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest as he thought. "Perhaps not directly, but she certainly knows more than she has let on. This message was meant for her, that much is clear. The question is, who would have left it for her, and why?" The constable shifted nervously on his feet. "Should we question her again, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot raised a hand, signaling for calm. "No, not yet. Let us not rush ahead. There are still too many unanswered questions. First, we must find out who could have written this, who benefits from planting doubt in our investigation, and who stands to gain by manipulating Mademoiselle Lemoyne." Dufresne nodded, though still visibly frustrated. "It seems like everyone is involved in some way. But this note, what does it mean by the truth lies beneath the surface? It feels like a clue." Poirot's eyes lit up, his mind already racing. "Indeed, it is a clue. The mention of beneath the surface is too significant to be ignored. It is an image, a metaphor. What is beneath the surface of the canal, where Henry's body was found? What is beneath the surface of our investigation that we have failed to notice?" Dufresne seemed to catch on, his eyes widening. "The canal. You think there's something more to the crime scene?" Poirot gave a subtle nod. "The truth may be hidden beneath the ice. Perhaps we have overlooked something simple, something right in front of us." The detective stood up briskly, his usual elegance replaced by a sudden urgency. "We will return to the canal, Dufresne. I must examine the scene once more. There is something we have missed, and I believe this message has shown us the way." The two men made their way back to the canal, the snow falling steadily round them. As they walked, Poirot's mind was filled with the implications of the note. It was becoming clearer that the mystery was far deeper than anyone had imagined. The players Lefebvre, Lemoyne, Duval each had a role to play, but none of them were the key. It was the hidden forces, the secrets buried beneath the surface, that would reveal the truth. Arriving at the canal, Poirot surveyed the area once more. The frozen water stretched out before them, a silent expanse that seemed to mock the detective's attempts to uncover its secrets. He knelt down, his eyes scanning the ice for anything unusual, Dufresne stood beside him, waiting for Poirot to make the next move. "What are we looking for, Poirot?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a small knife from his coat pocket and began carefully scraping the surface of the ice. His hands were steady, his movements deliberate. Slowly, a faint pattern began to emerge beneath the ice, something that had been obscured by the snow and the passage of time. "There," Poirot said softly, pointing to the pattern beneath the surface. "We were to focus on the body, to focus on the obvious. But what lies beneath the surface is more telling than we could have imagined." Dufresne peered closely at the ice, his eyes narrowing as he saw what Poirot had uncovered. "What is it?" Poirot smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "A clue, mon ami. A clue that will lead us to the final answer. The game is almost over, but we must continue with care." The truth was closer than ever, and Poirot could feel it every step, every piece falling into place. But there was one more secret to uncover, one more piece of the puzzle to fit into place. And when that piece fell, everything would become clear. Chapter 9, Hidden Connections. Day was cold and clear, the sunlight casting long shadows over the town of Vevey. The snow had stopped falling, but the chill remained. Poirot, along with Inspector Dufresne, stood at the canal, their attention fixed on the faint pattern beneath the ice. What appeared at first to be a simple crack in the surface had turned out to be more significant. An unusual marking, deliberate and calculated. It was not a natural phenomenon, but rather a clue, hidden in plain sight. Poirot crouched down, his eyes fixed on the ice. His breath formed small clouds in the air as he carefully examined the markings beneath. "It is subtle," he murmured to himself, almost inaudible. "But it is a clue nonetheless." Dufresne looked at the markings, still unsure of what he was seeing. "What do you think it is, Poirot?" Poirot straightened up, his gaze turning to the inspector. "It is not the pattern of the ice alone that we must consider. It is what lies beneath it, the object, or rather, the intention behind it. The message left here was meant for someone to find, but only the right person would recognize it for what it truly is." Dufresne squinted at the ice. "But why here? Why leave it beneath the surface? And who would have known to look for it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with understanding. "That is the question, mon ami, and the answer lies in the connections we have yet to explore. This is no ordinary crime scene. There are layers, hidden connections that we must uncover." The inspector looked at him, still processing Poirot's words. "Hidden connections? Do you mean between the suspects?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, Monsieur Lefebvre, Mademoiselle Lemoyne, Miss Duval, each of them has a relationship with Henry. But it is not what we have been told. They are not as separate from one another as they appear." Dufresne frowned. "You think they're all involved in something together?" "I believe they each have a role to play," Poirot said, his voice calm yet charged with a quiet intensity. "But none of them are acting alone. They are all connected by something larger, something that they have worked very hard to conceal. The key to this mystery lies in understanding that connection." The two men stood in silence for a moment, both contemplating Poirot's words. Finally, Dufresne spoke, his voice filled with curiosity. "So we go after the connection between them. But how do we begin?" Poirot's lips curled into a small smile, his eyes scanning the town before them. "We begin with the facts, mon ami. We begin with the ones who are closest to Henry, the ones who have the most to lose. We have already spoken to them, but now we must turn our attention to their behavior, their relationships with one another." As they walked back to the town hall, Poirot's mind raced through the interviews they had conducted so far. Each suspect had been carefully questioned, but their answers were now becoming more and more suspicious. The connections between them were becoming clearer, but there were still pieces of the puzzle that refused to fit. They arrived at the town hall, where the others had already gathered. Miss Duval, Monsieur Lefebvre, and Mademoiselle Lemoyne were seated in the same room. the tension palpable. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of the ongoing investigation, and the air seemed thick with unspoken words. Poirot addressed them calmly, his gaze sweeping over each one in turn. We are at a crossroads in this investigation. We have uncovered new evidence, and now we must confront the truth. But before we proceed, I must ask each of you to answer one more question. There was a slight shift in the room as the suspects straightened, each one clearly apprehensive. Poirot, ever composed, continued, I need to understand the nature of your relationships with one another. The truth is hidden in the connections you have, the things you have left unsaid. Henry's death is not the result of a single action, but of a series of events. It is not just his murder we are investigating, but the hidden ties that bound you all together. Lefebvre's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Lemoyne shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and Miss Duval's lips trembled slightly. Poirot's gaze lingered on each of them, sensing their unease. Monsieur Lefebvre, Poirot said, his voice as smooth as silk, you and Henry were business partners for many years. But what was the true nature of your relationship? Was it purely professional, or was there something more between you? Lefebvre's eyes flickered, but he maintained his composure. We were partners in business, nothing more. Henry was a good man, but we had our differences, as any business partners do. Poirot nodded slowly, but his eyes were piercing. And Mademoiselle Lemoyne, you worked closely with Henry, did you not? Was there something more than just a professional relationship? Lemoyne's hands twisted in her lap, her face paling slightly. No, there was nothing else, Monsieur Poirot. I admired him, of course, but he was my employer. That is all. Poirot turned to Miss Duval, who had been silent up until now. And you, Miss Duval, what was your relationship with Henry? You were to marry him, but did you know everything about his life? His dealings with Lefebvre, with Mademoiselle Lemoyne? Miss Duval's eyes widened, and she shifted uneasily in her seat. I knew he had business interests, of course, but I didn't involve myself in those things. I trusted Henry. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. Trust is a curious thing, is it not? Sometimes trust can cloud our judgment, but we must see beyond the surface of things. The truth lies in what you have left hidden. The suspects remained silent, the weight of Poirot's words hanging in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. The connections between them were there, just beneath the surface, but each one was too afraid to expose the truth. Poirot straightened up and turned to Dufresne. The pieces are all here, mon ami. Now we must gather them, one by one, until we see the full picture. Dufresne nodded, though his face still showed signs of confusion. And then we will know who is responsible. Poirot smiled softly, his gaze lingering on each suspect. We will know everything, Inspector. And when we do, the truth will be as clear as day. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. Morning was crisp and still, the town of Vevey seeming more desolate than ever. The weight of the investigation hung heavily over the town, as if the chill in the air mirrored the growing unease among the suspects. Poirot, ever the meticulous detective, was walking the line between patience and urgency. He had learned enough in the past days to know that the truth was drawing closer, but the final pieces of the puzzle had yet to fall into place. The fire in the town hall had burned low by the time Poirot and Inspector Dufresne returned. The room felt colder than before, as though the building itself were holding its breath, awaiting the next revelation. The suspects had been dismissed for the time being, and Poirot had given Dufresne the task of gathering any additional details that might help to solidify their case. Poirot, however, was focused on a more delicate matter. As he walked through the room, his eyes were sharp, scanning every detail, every subtle shift in the atmosphere. He had learned long ago that the smallest details could be the most telling. An overlooked glance, a fidgeting hand, the way a person shifted when asked a particular question. It was not just what people said that mattered, but how they said it, and what they did not say at all. Dufresne entered the room, a stack of new reports in hand. But it was the look on his face that caught Poirot's attention. "You have something?" Poirot asked, his voice calm yet expectant. Dufresne nodded, a hint of excitement creeping into his normally reserved demeanor. "We received a report from the constable this morning. They found something at the Lemoyne residence." Poirot's interest piqued. "Something significant." Dufresne handed him a piece of paper, which Poirot examined carefully. The note was brief, hastily written in a familiar hand, and upon reading it, Poirot's face softened with understanding. "It seems," Poirot began, pausing for effect, "that someone left a message for Mademoiselle Lemoyne. A warning, perhaps." Dufresne leaned forward. "A warning? What does it say?" Poirot read aloud, his voice steady. "The truth lies deeper still. Do not let the ice fool you." Dufresne frowned. "What does that mean?" "The ice." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the note for a moment longer. "It is a clue, mon ami, a clue that speaks to us in riddles. The ice, of course, refers to the frozen canal, the place where Henry was found. But why would anyone leave this for Lemoyne?" Dufresne asked, his brow furrowing. "What does it have to do with her?" Poirot folded the note, his eyes narrowing as he considered the implications. "That, Inspector, is what we must understand. The message was intended for her, but it is also a key to the larger mystery. Someone wants us to believe the truth lies beneath the surface, hidden in plain sight." Dufresne leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the details. "So, we're looking for something at the canal? Something more?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Indeed. But it is not just about what is hidden beneath the ice. It is about what has been concealed, what we have overlooked in our rush to find answers." With that, Poirot stood, his eyes scanning the room once more. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form, but there were still too many gaps in the story. The connection between the suspects, the hidden truths beneath the surface, and the cryptic warnings all pointed to something much deeper than they had first realized. "We must return to the canal," Poirot declared. "There is more there, something we missed before. Perhaps it is time to dig deeper, to uncover what has been kept hidden from us." Dufresne stood as well, his expression resolute. "You think the key is there?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "I am certain of it. The truth, as always, lies beneath the surface. We must be patient, but we must also be ready to act when the time comes." The two men made their way to the canal once more, the air colder than ever. The town, so still and silent, seemed to hold its breath as they approached the scene of the crime. Poirot's mind raced as he considered every possibility, every piece of the puzzle that remained unsolved. He could feel the tension building, the mystery drawing closer to its inevitable conclusion. As they arrived at the canal, Poirot stopped, his eyes scanning the frozen surface once more. This time, however, he did not approach it with the same detached analysis as before. This time, there was a different kind of energy in his movements, a quiet intensity that spoke of something much deeper. Poirot crouched down near the edge of the canal, his fingers brushing the ice as if seeking something he knew was there, but could not yet see. Dufresne watched him, waiting for Poirot to make his next move. "There is something here," Poirot murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Something hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered." He took a small knife from his coat and began to scrape gently at the ice. Dufresne stood by, his patience wearing thin as he waited for Poirot to reveal the truth. After a moment, Poirot's movements became more deliberate, and with a final scrape, he paused, his eyes lighting up with satisfaction. "I knew it," Poirot said softly, a smile playing on his lips. "The truth is always in the details, Inspector. Now we have the final piece." Dufresne stepped closer, peering over Poirot's shoulder. Beneath the surface of the ice, barely visible, was a small object, something metallic. glinting faintly in the dim light. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he retrieved the object carefully. "A cufflink," he said, holding it up for Dufresne to see. "A cufflink identical to the one we found earlier. But now we know what it means." Chapter 11. Tension's recent discovery of the cufflink beneath the ice had shifted the investigation into a new phase. Poirot held the object delicately between his fingers, his eyes scanning the gleaming surface. It was the same as the one found at the crime scene, an unmistakable clue. And yet it was far more than that. This cufflink had been deliberately placed, hidden beneath the surface of the canal. And it spoke volumes about the calculated nature of the crime. Dufresne stood beside him, his brow furrowed with concern. "But what does this mean, Poirot? Why would someone leave it here, beneath the ice?" Poirot's gaze never wavered from the cufflink. "The cufflink is not simply a piece of evidence. It is a message, Inspector. A message meant for someone. But for whom?" Dufresne shifted uncomfortably. Could it be Lefebvre? Or perhaps Mademoiselle Lemoine? Poirot's eyes glinted with a mix of amusement and frustration. "Ah, but we cannot jump to conclusions, mon ami. We have found the cufflink, but we must now understand why it was left here. Why the canal? Why beneath the ice?" Dufresne stared at the cufflink, his thoughts racing. "It doesn't make sense. Why not just leave it where it could be found easily?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Because this is not about ease, Inspector. This is about sending a message, one that would only be understood by the right person." For a moment, neither man spoke. The air around them seemed charged with an unseen tension. Poirot was deep in thought, his mind turning over the implications of the cufflink's placement. His intuition told him they were getting closer, but there was still something elusive, something hidden just beyond their reach. Poirot stood up slowly, brushing off his coat as he turned to face Dufresne. "We must return to the town hall. There's much more to uncover, and the suspects are becoming increasingly nervous. I believe it is time for the next step." Dufresne nodded, though he was still uncertain. "But what should we do now, Poirot? The clue is there, but it doesn't lead us to the killer. What do we have left to go on?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with quiet confidence. "The truth lies in the connections between the suspects. The cufflink is a small piece of a much larger puzzle. We must observe their behavior, push them just a little further. The tension will crack, and when it does, we will see who is hiding what." The walk back to the town hall felt longer than it should have. The chill in the air seemed depressing on them, and the streets felt empty, as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. As Poirot and Dufresne entered the hall, they were greeted by the usual group of suspects: Lefebvre, Lemoine, and Duval, each seated in a corner, their faces betraying varying degrees of anxiety. Poirot took his place at the head of the room, his sharp eyes scanning the group. There was a palpable tension in the air, a subtle shift in the way they were all sitting. Lefebvre, the usually composed businessman, had his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his posture stiff. Lemoine, always so poised, now shifted uneasily in her seat, her eyes darting nervously between Poirot and the others. Miss Duval, however, seemed the most controlled, almost too controlled, as if she were holding something back. Poirot allowed the silence to linger for a moment, letting the tension rise before speaking. "I trust you are all well this morning?" His voice was calm, almost casual, but it had the desired effect. Each suspect stiffened slightly, as if bracing for something more. Lefebvre cleared his throat first. "What is it you want from us, Poirot? We have already told you everything we know." Poirot's lips curved into a small smile. "Ah, but the truth, Monsieur Lefebvre, is always more complicated than what we are told. You have told me much, but I believe there is more to uncover. For example," Poirot continued, his gaze now shifting to Mademoiselle Lemoine, "what of the message found at your home?" Lemoine's face went pale. her hands immediately clutching the edge of her chair as though she were trying to steady herself. Message. I don't know what you mean. Poirot raised an eyebrow. The note found in your fireplace. A warning, as it were. Do you not recall it? For a moment, Lemoyne seemed lost for words. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Poirot watched her closely, noting the rapid rise and fall of her chest. It was clear she was hiding something. Lefebvre's eyes narrowed, his voice low and defensive. Mademoiselle Lemoyne is not the issue here, Poirot. We're all in the same position. None of us had anything to do with Henry's death. Poirot turned his gaze on Lefebvre. Ah, Monsieur Lefebvre, you are very quick to defend your colleague. But that is often the sign of guilt, is it not? You all speak of innocence, yet there is something you are all concealing. The question is, what? Miss Duval's voice cut through the tension. Poirot, please, we've told you everything we know. We don't have anything to hide. Poirot held up a hand, silencing her. Ah, but you see, Miss Duval, that is exactly what you're hiding your own fears. You are afraid of what will happen if you say too much. Each of you is holding onto something, and I intend to find out what it is. The suspects shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, the walls they had built around themselves seemed to crack, the pressure mounting as Poirot's words sunk in. He could see it in their eyes. Each of them was hiding something they feared to reveal. Poirot stood up, his expression calm but determined. We will continue our investigation, and soon the truth will be revealed. But remember, there is no escaping the truth, no matter how hard you try. Chapter 12. The confrontation. Days following the tense meeting in the town hall had been filled with a palpable unease. The suspects had returned to their homes, but the weight of suspicion seemed to cling to each of them, heavier than the cold that gripped Vevey. Poirot, however, remained resolute. He knew they were on the verge of breaking the case wide open. The threads of the mystery had become clearer, but there was still one last step to take. The time for subtlety was over. It was time to confront them all. Poirot had requested the suspects to return to the town hall for one final gathering. This time, however, they would not be allowed to sit in the comfortable silence they had grown accustomed to. This time, Poirot would take the reins and lead them into the truth, whether they were ready for it or not. As the suspects filed into the room, each one looked slightly more apprehensive than before. Lefebvre, usually so confident, entered with his jaw clenched tightly, his eyes darting around as if expecting an ambush. Lemoyne, still pale from their previous exchange, kept her gaze lowered, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the fabric of her dress. Miss Duval, ever composed, seemed to carry a weight in her posture, her movements calculated. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his hands folded neatly in front of him. His expression was calm, but his eyes sharp, observant, saw everything. He could feel the tension building, like a taut string ready to snap. I trust you all have been reflecting on our previous conversations, Poirot began, his voice carrying a quiet authority. We have spoken of motives, of connections, and of the truth hidden beneath the surface. But now, it is time to bring those connections into the light. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. The room seemed to grow heavier as he studied each suspect. The air was thick with anticipation, as if everyone knew that the final reveal was imminent. You have all told me your stories, Poirot continued, but I believe there are still things unsaid, things that each of you is hiding. It is time to face the truth, the real truth. Lefebvre's eyes flicked to the side, his lips pressing into a thin line. What are you suggesting, Poirot? That we are all somehow involved in Henry's death? That we not involved, Poirot interrupted smoothly, but connected. Connected by things far more subtle than what you've been willing to admit. Miss Duval sat up straighter in her chair, her gaze unwavering. I don't know what you're talking about. We've already told you everything. Henry was my fiancé. I loved him, and yet, Poirot interjected. You are not as certain of his loyalty as you would have us believe." A ripple of discomfort passed through Miss Duval, but she remained silent, her lips pressed together. Poirot's gaze shifted to Lefebvre, who seemed to grow even more tense. "The truth is not always found in the words we speak," Poirot said softly. "It is often found in the things we try to hide." Lemoyne flinched at his words, but still, she did not speak. Poirot could sense her internal struggle, the fight to hold onto the secret she was clearly harboring. The game was changing now, and they all knew it. Poirot stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the group. "Monsieur Lefebvre, Mademoiselle Lemoyne, Miss Duval, all of you are hiding something. And it is no coincidence that you are all here now, gathered in this room. Each of you played a part in Henry's death, whether you intended to or not." Lefebvre's face hardened, his jaw tightening as he stood abruptly. "You're wrong, Poirot. I had no part in Henry's death." But you see, Monsieur Lefebvre, you are so quick to deny it that you've revealed more than you intended," Poirot said, his voice cutting through Lefebvre's protest like a sharp blade. "The fear in your eyes is the first clue, and the second is the way you've hidden your true feelings behind that mask of indifference." Lefebvre took a step back, clearly rattled by Poirot's insight. "You don't know what you're talking about." Poirot did not let him off so easily. "No, let us see, then, if I do. Miss Duval, you loved Henry, but you were also aware of his business dealings. The tension between you and Lefebvre, the way you distanced yourself from the rest of the group. I wonder, was there something you suspected? Something you knew about the business that made you feel so uneasy?" Miss Duval's face paled slightly, but she refused to answer. "Mademoiselle Lemoyne," Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent, "you worked closely with Henry, but there were things between you and him, weren't there? A relationship that went beyond mere professionalism? Something that has been hidden, something that has now come to light." Lemoyne's hands trembled slightly, and for a moment, Poirot thought she might break, but she kept her gaze steady, though it was clear she was struggling to maintain her composure. Poirot's next words were quieter, almost a whisper, and the cuffling found beneath the ice. "It was no accident. It was meant to be found by the right person at the right time. The real question is, why leave it there? What did it mean? Why did you all, each of you, leave clues that we have only just begun to piece together?" The room was silent for a long moment, each of the suspects processing Poirot's words. The weight of his accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For the first time since the investigation began, the truth seemed within reach, but it was still obscured by a fog of secrets and lies. Poirot turned to Dufresne, his voice calm and certain. "The time has come, Inspector. We have gathered all the pieces. Now we must put them together." Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. Heath atmosphere in the room was suffocating. The suspects sat in tense silence, each of them visibly affected by Poirot's carefully crafted confrontation. Their unease was palpable, but none of them dared speak, as if afraid that any word spoken would further entrench them in the web Poirot had so skillfully spun around them. It was clear to Poirot that the truth was close, so close he could almost taste it. But there was one final step to take before it all came into focus. Miss Duval, Lefebvre, and Lemoyne were each trying to maintain a semblance of composure, but their bodies betrayed them. Lefebvre's fingers drummed nervously against the armrest of his chair, while Miss Duval's eyes darted around the room, her fingers twisting a handkerchief in her lap. Mademoiselle Lemoyne, though still poised, had a tense rigidity in her posture that suggested her nerves were fraying at the edges. Poirot had already seen enough. He knew what each of them was hiding, and he understood their motivations. But the pieces had yet to fully align. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. The moment was coming, he could feel it, but he had to wait. Sometimes, the most crucial moments were those of silence, when all the participants believed they had no choice but to act. And it was in that silence that the first crack appeared. Without warning, Lefebvre rose from his chair. The movement was sudden, jerky, as if the pressure had finally become too much for him to bear. His eyes were wild, his breath shallow. He stumbled backward, his face ashen. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice breaking. "This is madness. You're accusing me of murder, of treachery, but you have no proof, nothing." Poirot remained still, his posture calm, as he watched Lefebvre's desperate movements. The rest of the room remained silent, the tension tightening around them. "I did not kill Henry." Lefebvre's voice cracked. "I had no reason. None of this makes sense. You're grasping at straws, Poirot. He froze mid-sentence, his eyes widening as if he had just realized something. There was a shift in the air, an almost imperceptible change in the room. Poirot knew it immediately. Lefebvre had broken. He had revealed more than he intended. "Ah, Monsieur Lefebvre," Poirot said quietly, his voice like silk. "You see, the truth has a way of revealing itself when we least expect it. It is your actions, your desperation, that have exposed you." Lefebvre's face went pale as his body went rigid. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know," Poirot interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "You see, I understand human nature, mon ami. When we are trapped, when we are cornered, we begin to act recklessly. You were calm before, too calm, and now you are unraveling." Lefebvre's face twisted in confusion and fear. "You're lying." At that moment, the door to the room opened suddenly, interrupting Lefebvre's outburst. A constable entered, breathless and clearly flustered. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he approached Poirot. "Excuse me, Monsieur Poirot," the constable said urgently. "We've just found something strange." Poirot turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "What is it, my friend? What have you discovered?" The constable handed Poirot a small bundle of papers. "It's from Mademoiselle Lemoyne's office," he said, his voice shaky. A letter, an unsigned letter, but written by someone who knew too much. Poirot unfolded the letter carefully, his eyes scanning the hastily written words. "The trap is set. The evidence is in place. But do not forget the truth lies beneath the surface. You must act before it is too late." Poirot's gaze flicked up to Mademoiselle Lemoyne, whose expression had turned from shock to horror. She trembled slightly in her seat, her eyes wide and glassy. "I don't know who could have sent that," she whispered, her voice quivering. "I didn't." Poirot held up a hand, silencing her. "Ah, Mademoiselle Lemoyne, I think you do know. The question is not who wrote the letter, but why it was written. You see, this is not a mere letter, it is a message to you, from someone who knows your deepest fears. And in the panic of those fears, you have allowed yourself to be drawn into something much larger than you ever intended." Lefebvre, still pacing and shaking with nervous energy, glanced between Poirot and Lemoyne. "What is this? What's happening? I don't understand." Poirot turned to him, his gaze calm but piercing. "You see, Monsieur Lefebvre, the real question is not whether you killed Henry. The question is who you were trying to protect. And now your actions have led us to the answer." Lefebvre looked increasingly bewildered, his breaths coming faster. "Protect? I don't—" Before he could continue, a sudden sound interrupted the faintest noise, a soft thud, followed by a sharp intake of breath from Miss Duval. All eyes turned to her as she stood, her face pale and her body trembling. I can't take it anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't pretend. It was me. I had to do it. Henry." The room fell silent as the confession hung in the air. Miss Duval's tears began to fall, her hands trembling as she clutched her chest, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It wasn't what you think. Henry, he was going to leave me, for her, for Mademoiselle Lemoyne, and I couldn't bear it. I loved him too much. Poirot held up his hand, signaling her to stop. His expression softened, but his eyes remained sharp. "It is time to tell the truth, Miss Duval, and the truth, as always, lies beneath the surface." Chapter 14. The final piece falls into Placide's room was charged with an electric tension. The confession had left everyone in stunned silence. Miss Duval, her hands clasped tightly before her, was still trembling, her face pale and her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. The weight of her words had hung in the air, but now it was up to Poirot to untangle the truth from the chaos of emotions. For a long moment, no one spoke. Poirot stood still, his eyes never leaving Miss Duval. His expression was unreadable, but there was no rush in his demeanor. He knew the truth, but he had to be careful with his next steps, with his words. He understood that this moment was not just about revealing the killer, but about understanding why it had happened. "Miss Duval," Poirot said finally, his voice soft but firm, "you have confessed to your role in Henry's death, but I must ask, why did you think this was the only option? Why did you believe that his death was the solution?" Miss Duval's lips quivered as she tried to hold back more tears. I loved him. I couldn't bear the thought of losing him. I knew he was going to leave me. He'd been distant, and I found out about his feelings for Mademoiselle Lemoine. I didn't want to lose him. I thought that if I stopped him from leaving, everything would go back to normal." Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored Miss Duval's. "Love," he said quietly, "can drive people to do desperate things, but love is not an excuse for murder, Miss Duval. You did not think of the consequences at that moment. You acted out of fear and desperation." "I didn't mean to," Miss Duval whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, but when I saw him with her, I couldn't control it. I couldn't bear the thought of him being with someone else." Poirot looked at her for a long moment, then glanced over at the other suspects. They were all watching, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Lefebvre, still standing in the corner, had remained silent since Miss Duval's confession. Mademoiselle Lemoine, on the other hand, was visibly shaken, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Poirot turned to Lefebvre, his eyes narrowing. "And what of you, Monsieur Lefebvre? You were close to Henry, and yet you remained silent about the tension between him and Miss Duval. Why? Was it out of loyalty to her, or was there something else at play here?" Lefebvre swallowed hard, his face flushed with anxiety. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as though unsure of how to respond. I didn't know what was happening between them," he said, his voice low. "Henry and I had our disagreements, yes, but I never imagined things would escalate like this." Poirot's gaze remained steady. "And Mademoiselle Lemoine?" he asked, his tone still gentle but insistent. "What role did she play in all of this?" Mademoiselle Lemoine looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. "I had no idea. I swear to you, Monsieur Poirot, I had no idea that Henry was planning to leave her. We never spoke of it. He never told me about Miss Duval's suspicions. I loved him, but I would never have wanted him to die." Poirot studied her carefully, his eyes lingering on her face. "And yet, you were the one who received the warning, Mademoiselle Lemoine. The letter found in your fireplace. Someone was trying to protect you, or perhaps trying to protect their own interests." Lemoine flinched at the mention of the letter, but she didn't respond immediately. Her hands trembled as she clasped them tighter. I don't know who would have sent that letter, but I don't think it was meant for me. It must have been a mistake. Someone was trying to confuse things." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A mistake? A letter, hastily written, hidden in your fireplace?" "No, Mademoiselle Lemoine. This letter was meant for you, but I believe it was also meant to lead us astray. Someone was guiding our investigation in a different direction." The room fell silent once more, the tension thick and suffocating. Poirot turned back to Miss Duval, his eyes softening. "You have admitted your crime, Miss Duval. But there is more to this story than just a moment of passion gone wrong. There is a deeper connection, a manipulation at work here. Miss Duval's eyes filled with tears again. What do you mean? Poirot sighed. You were not acting alone. Someone else was involved, someone who knew how to play on your emotions. Someone who had a vested interest in seeing Henry dead. Lefebvre's eyes widened in realization. What are you saying? You think someone else planned this? Poirot nodded slowly. I believe that the real orchestrator of this crime has yet to reveal themselves, and I suspect that person is still here, among us. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Poirot's words hung in the air like a dark cloud. He had made his point, but the final pieces were still missing. Miss Duval, Poirot said softly, his voice cutting through the tension. You did not act alone, and the person who pushed you to this point will be found. The truth was finally coming into focus, but there was one last step to take. The final piece was within reach, and Poirot could feel it. The game was not over yet, but soon it would be. Chapter 15. The final gathering room in the town hall was thick with tension. The weight of Poirot's words hanging over the gathered suspects like a storm cloud ready to burst. Miss Duval sat with her head bowed, her hands trembling in her lap as she processed the enormity of her confession. Mademoiselle Lemoyne looked stricken, her face pale and drawn, while Lefebvre's lips were pressed into a thin line, his eyes flickering between Poirot and the others. Each of them was trying to keep their composure, but Poirot could see through their masks of control. The truth had begun to unravel, and they were all caught in its pull. Poirot, ever calm and composed, watched them carefully. He had already begun to piece together the final steps of this complex puzzle. But the last phase of the investigation required one thing: the complete breakdown of their defenses. The time for subtlety was over. The time for confrontation was at hand. The detective stood before them, his sharp gaze sweeping over the group. We have come to the final stage of this investigation, he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of finality. You have all spoken to me. You have all confessed in part, but there is still much left unsaid, and it is in the spaces between your words where the truth lies. A heavy silence fell. No one spoke. They all waited for Poirot to continue. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving the group. The motive behind Henry's death is not simple, Poirot continued, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. It was not driven by passion alone, but by a combination of emotions: fear, jealousy, betrayal, and above all, manipulation. He turned to Miss Duval, whose eyes were filled with a mixture of guilt and dread. Miss Duval, you acted out of love, but it was not only love that led you to kill Henry. You were manipulated by someone close to you, someone who understood your vulnerability, your desperation. Miss Duval's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at her lap. She couldn't meet Poirot's gaze. Poirot then turned to Mademoiselle Lemoyne. Mademoiselle Lemoyne, you were part of this scheme, though not directly. Your feelings for Henry clouded your judgment, and your silence allowed the situation to escalate. But I believe there is more to your involvement than you've let on. Lemoyne's face flushed, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Poirot raised a hand to silence her. But the truth always has a way of revealing itself. You were not entirely unaware of Miss Duval's feelings, were you? You knew of the tension between her and Henry, and you knew that the situation was about to boil over. But you said nothing. You allowed it to happen. Lemoyne recoiled, but Poirot did not let her deflect. You believed that Henry would choose you, and in your mind, Miss Duval was standing in your way. But you didn't want him dead. No, you wanted him for yourself. Lemoyne's voice trembled as she finally spoke. I never meant for any of this to happen. I loved Henry, but I never wanted this. I didn't know what she would do. I didn't know she. Poirot's gaze softened for a moment. Mademoiselle, you are a victim of your own emotions. But you must understand, Silence in the face of betrayal is as dangerous as any lie. Finally, Poirot turned to Lefebvre. The businessman had remained silent throughout the confrontation, but now he was visibly shaken. His usual composure had cracked, and his eyes darted around the room, his breath coming faster. "Monsieur Lefebvre," Poirot said, his voice low and precise, "you, too, played a role in this tragedy. You stood by watching as the situation unfolded, but you did not intervene. Your relationship with Miss Duval, your involvement in her life was a catalyst for her actions." Lefebvre's face twisted with frustration. I wasn't involved. I didn't want any of this to happen. I had my own reasons for staying out of it." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a mix of understanding and disapproval. "Of course, Monsieur Lefebvre, your reasons were selfish. You were too afraid to lose control, to lose your place in Henry's business and in his life. You allowed Miss Duval to suffer, to spiral deeper into jealousy and fear. And in the end, you let her do your dirty work." Lefebvre's face turned crimson, and he stood abruptly, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "You don't understand. It was not like that. I had no idea she would." Poirot raised his hand, signaling for him to stop. "I understand more than you think. And now you will listen." Poirot turned to Dufresne, who had been silently observing the entire scene. "Inspector, we have gathered all the pieces. The lies, the deceit, the manipulation, they are all here. It is time to put an end to this." Dufresne nodded slowly, understanding that the end was near. The truth was in front of them, but it was still too early to close the case. The suspects were not yet ready to fully face the consequences of their actions, and Poirot knew that they needed one last push, a final confrontation. Poirot turned back to the group, his voice unwavering. "You have all played your part in this tragedy. Miss Duval, Mademoiselle Lemoyne, Monsieur Lefebvre, each of you is responsible for the death of Henry. But the real question remains, who orchestrated it all?" He paused, letting the question linger in the air as the tension in the room reached its peak. Chapter 16. The revealed room seemed to hold its breath. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Poirot's final question echoed in the air. Who orchestrated it all? The suspects Lefebvre, Lemoyne, and Duval were all on edge, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes darting from one person to the next. They had each confessed pieces of the story, but Poirot knew that the full truth had yet to be uncovered. Miss Duval shifted in her seat, her fingers still nervously twisting the hem of her dress. Lefebvre, standing near the window, clenched his fists as though he were struggling to maintain control. Mademoiselle Lemoyne, her face pale and her eyes wide, was staring at the floor, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Poirot, ever composed, studied each of them with a piercing intensity. "Let us speak plainly," Poirot began, his voice calm and deliberate. "Henry's death was no accident. We know that. But what we do not know, what I have yet to piece together, is why it happened. The motive is clear: jealousy, betrayal, and fear. But there was something else. Something that ties all of you together in a way that none of you have revealed." The tension in the room mounted as Poirot continued. "You each had your part to play. Miss Duval, you acted out of love, yes, but also fear. You feared losing Henry to Mademoiselle Lemoyne, and that fear pushed you to the edge. Mademoiselle Lemoyne, you were caught in a web of your own emotions, but you knew more than you let on. You knew the depth of Miss Duval's feelings for Henry, and, perhaps, you were willing to play a dangerous game of your own. And Monsieur Lefebvre," Poirot said, turning his gaze to the businessman, "you were the catalyst. You stood by and watched, indifferent to what was unfolding. You had your own interests at heart." Lefebvre flinched, but his expression remained defiant. "I didn't cause this," he spat. "I had no reason to. Henry was a good business partner." Poirot's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Ah, Monsieur Lefebvre, that is where you are mistaken. You had more reason than you realize. The business, the partnership, the power you were willing to sacrifice Henry for your own gain. But it wasn't just money. It was controlled. Lefebvre's eyes widened, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "What are you saying?" Poirot stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You wanted Henry's place. You wanted his power, his position. You were close to losing everything, your status, your wealth. And Miss Duval was your pawn. You saw her desperation and used it. You pushed her toward Henry, knowing her emotions would drive her to do something drastic." Miss Duval gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No, that's not true. He wouldn't." Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained steady. "You were blinded by your own grief, Miss Duval. But you see now, don't you? You were manipulated. Your feelings were used against you." Lemoyne's voice broke the silence. "No, this isn't how it happened." Her voice trembled with emotion. I didn't want any of this. I loved Henry. I never wanted him to die." Poirot turned toward her, his gaze sharp. "Mademoiselle Lemoyne, you may not have wanted Henry's death, but you allowed the situation to spiral. You allowed your feelings for him to cloud your judgment. You were not a passive participant. You were, in your own way, complicit." Lemoyne trembled, her hands wringing in her lap. "I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't know she would." She choked on the words, unable to finish. Poirot's eyes softened slightly as he addressed her. "It is never easy to accept our own role in tragedy, mademoiselle. But you see, none of you are without fault. The web of emotions, betrayals, and desires you wove together led to this moment. Henry's death was the culmination of your collective actions." The room fell into a heavy silence. The weight of Poirot's words hung like a shroud over the group. The realization had set in. They were all complicit, in one way or another. The layers of their stories had been peeled away, and the truth was now fully exposed. Poirot took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the room, locking eyes with each suspect in turn. "But there is more to this story, something that has not yet been revealed. The person who truly orchestrated Henry's death is someone who understood each of you. Someone who saw your weaknesses and used them to their advantage. Someone who manipulated not just Miss Duval, but all of you." Dufresne, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "You mean the person who sent the warning letter?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, the letter found in Mademoiselle Lemoyne's fireplace was not a message of caution. It was a message of control, a final move in a game that had already been set in motion." Miss Duval looked from Poirot to the others, her eyes wide. "Who could it be?" Poirot smiled softly, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "The person who has been pulling the strings, the person who stood to gain the most from Henry's death, is none other than Monsieur Lefebvre." Lefebvre recoiled as if struck. "You're mad." I didn't." Poirot's smile faded, and his voice turned sharp. "You didn't kill Henry yourself, Monsieur Lefebvre, but you set the stage for his death. You planted the seeds, and Miss Duval's grief was the trigger. You used her as a pawn, as you've used everyone else around you." Lefebvre's face drained of color, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Poirot shook his head gently. "That, Monsieur Lefebvre, is the tragedy of it all. You never meant for it to go this far, but you never stopped to think of the consequences. And now, it is too late." The final piece had fallen into place. The game was over. The truth, though painful and complicated, was finally out in the open. Poirot turned to Dufresne, his eyes weary but satisfied. "The case is closed, Inspector. Justice will be done." Chapter 17, Outcome and Justice. If tension in the room was palpable, the weight of Poirot's revelations hanging heavy in the air. Lefebvre, now visibly broken, slumped in his chair, his eyes downcast. His usual composure had shattered, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Miss Duval, her hands still trembling, looked between the others as if she were unsure of her place in this unraveling drama. Mademoiselle Lemoyne, too, was pale, her lips trembling as she tried to come to terms with the truth that had been forced into the open. Poirot stood at the front of the room, his expression calm, but filled with the quiet certainty that had driven the entire investigation. His work was nearly done, but the last few steps remained. The pieces had fallen into place, and now it was time for justice to take its course. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, its warmth in stark contrast to the coldness that had descended upon the room. The truth was out, but the consequences were yet to be faced. Miss Duval, Poirot began, his voice gentle but firm. You acted out of love, but also fear and desperation. You believed that killing Henry would solve your problems, that it would keep him from leaving you. But love does not justify murder, no matter how painful the circumstances. You have confessed, and that confession will weigh heavily on you. Miss Duval's eyes filled with tears again, but she remained silent, as if she were beyond words. The guilt was too much, and she couldn't find the strength to speak. Poirot turned his attention to Lefebvre, his gaze unwavering. Monsieur Lefebvre, you are the one who orchestrated Henry's death. You used Miss Duval, manipulated her into believing that there was no other way. You wanted power, control, and you saw Henry as a threat to both. But in the end, you underestimated the consequences of your actions. You never imagined that someone would pay with their life. Lefebvre opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. He looked at Poirot, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and rage. His shoulders sagged as he finally realized the depth of his own betrayal, not only to Henry, but to everyone around him. And what of Mademoiselle Lemoyne? Poirot asked, his eyes now shifting to her. You were not the one to deliver the fatal blow, but you were complicit in your silence. You knew of Miss Duval's feelings, and you knew of Henry's relationships. You stood by and did nothing, hoping that the pieces would fall in your favor. But in the end, silence in the face of such violence is as guilty as the act itself. Lemoyne's eyes filled with tears, and her shoulders trembled. I never wanted this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I loved Henry. I never wanted him to die. But I never spoke up. I should have, but I didn't know how. Poirot's gaze softened slightly. It is not easy to confront the truth, mademoiselle, but we must all take responsibility for our actions or inactions. You were caught in your own web of feelings, and you allowed it to cloud your judgment. Dufresne, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, finally stepped forward. So what happens now? What are the consequences for each of them? Poirot nodded, his gaze turning to the inspector. The law will decide their fate, of course, but the truth has already come out. Miss Duval, you acted in a moment of panic, and though your actions were driven by emotion, the law will take that into account. Your confession will not go unheard. He turned to Lefebvre. Monsieur Lefebvre, your role in orchestrating this crime cannot be overlooked. You will face charges, but perhaps your motivations, your fear of losing control, will be considered in your sentencing. Poirot then faced Mademoiselle Lemoyne. As for you, Mademoiselle Lemoyne, your silence will not go unpunished. But I believe you did not intend for anyone to die. You will be held accountable for your part. But I hope that this experience will lead to reflection and growth. The suspects remained silent, each of them processing Poirot's words. The weight of the situation had settled into their bones, and now there was no escape from the consequences of their actions. They had been caught in a web of their own making, and the threads had finally snapped. Poirot's eyes softened as he addressed the group one final time. Justice will be done, but understand this: the consequences of our actions are never limited to just ourselves. You have all learned that the hard way. It is not enough to act in our own interests. We must think beyond ourselves, consider the consequences, and hold ourselves accountable. Dufresne nodded in agreement, though his expression remained serious. "We'll make sure the proper legal steps are taken, Poirot." Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes distant for a moment. "Of course, Inspector. But I believe we are all done here. The truth has been revealed, and now it is time for the law to take its course. But remember, the investigation was not just about solving a crime, it was about understanding the people behind it, their motives, and their fears. It is through understanding that we come to know the truth." The room grew still as Poirot finished speaking. The suspects, no longer able to hold onto their facade, were left to face the reality of their actions. The mystery was no longer just about the murder of Henry. It was about the tangled emotions, hidden desires, and fears that had led to this tragic outcome. Poirot turned to leave, his voice carrying one final thought. "The truth is always simpler than we think, Inspector. We just need to be patient enough to see it." Chapter 18. The closing remark. The sun had begun to set over Vevey, casting long shadows across the town. The silence that had settled over the town hall after Poirot's revelations was only broken by the occasional rustling of papers or the soft sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors. Poirot sat in his chair, his hands folded neatly in front of him, his eyes lost in thought. The investigation was over, the pieces of the puzzle had been put together, and the truth had been revealed. Yet, even now, Poirot couldn't shake the feeling that something was left unfinished. Inspector Dufresne sat across from him, quietly reviewing the final reports, his brow furrowed. He had always been impressed by Poirot's methodical approach, but now, as the case drew to a close, he was struck by the quiet satisfaction that radiated from the detective. "Poirot," Dufresne said, breaking the silence, "I still can't quite believe it. The way everything fell into place. I thought we were on the right track, but it wasn't until you pointed out those final connections that it all made sense. Miss Duval, Lefevre, and Lemoyne each had their part to play, and yet it was all woven together by something we couldn't see at first." Poirot gave a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "The truth is always hidden beneath the surface, Inspector. We are so often blinded by our own assumptions, by the things we want to see. But once we strip away the layers, once we peel back the facade, the truth becomes clear." Dufresne nodded, his gaze drifting toward the window. The sky was tinged with the soft orange glow of the setting sun, but the air still carried a chill. "It's a sad ending, isn't it? All of them, in one way or another, lost something they cared about. But in the end, it was their own choices that led them here." Poirot's expression grew serious. "Yes, the consequences of their actions have caught up with them. But the saddest part of all, Inspector, is that they never truly understood the gravity of their choices until it was too late. They let their emotions guide them, their fears and desires clouded their judgment. And that is what ultimately led to Henry's death." Dufresne glanced at Poirot, his voice thoughtful. "And now they will face justice. Miss Duval, Lefevre, and Lemoyne will all pay for their part in Henry's death." Poirot didn't respond immediately, his eyes lingering on the fire in the hearth. "Justice is not always as straightforward as we'd like it to be, Inspector. We see the world through our own lenses, through our own biases. But the law will take its course, and I trust that it will be fair." Dufresne shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And what about the one who orchestrated it all? The one who knew how to play on their emotions, who manipulated them into action?" Poirot looked up, his gaze steady. "You're asking about Lefevre, aren't you?" Dufresne hesitated before nodding. "Yes, he seemed to be the one who pushed Miss Duval into that final act. But he didn't kill Henry himself. So what does that make him?" Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. "It makes him a man who was blinded by ambition. He wanted to maintain control over Henry, over his business, over the woman he thought he could manipulate. He played a part, yes, but he did not pull the final trigger. In the end, it was Miss Duval who took that step. She made the choice. Lefebvre's role was more subtle, but it was no less significant. His manipulation created the circumstances, but it was Miss Duval's emotions that drove the crime. Dufresne sat back, considering Poirot's words. So, in a way, they're all guilty, but in different ways. Poirot nodded slowly. Exactly. The crime was not one person's fault. It was a culmination of actions, emotions, and decisions. Each of them contributed to Henry's death, whether directly or indirectly. But it was their own flaws, pride, fear, jealousy that led them here. There was a long pause as the two men sat in silence. Poirot's eyes lingered on the final report, the pieces of the puzzle now fully assembled. The case was closed, but the weight of the truth was heavy in the room. Dufresne finally broke the silence. So what now, Poirot? Is there more to uncover? More twists we haven't seen? Poirot gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. No, Inspector. The investigation is over. The truth has been revealed. It is now time for justice to be served. But one must always remember, the truth is never as simple as it seems. There are always hidden layers, always things left unsaid. But once we accept the truth, we can move forward. Dufresne nodded, his expression somber. I suppose that's all we can do, isn't it? Move forward. Poirot stood up slowly, adjusting his coat. Yes, the past cannot be changed, but we can learn from it. We can only move forward with the lessons it teaches us. The two men walked toward the door, the weight of the case lifting from their shoulders. Poirot's mind was already moving on, ready to face whatever new mystery lay ahead. But for now, the quiet satisfaction of solving this case would have to suffice. As they left the room, Poirot paused at the door and turned back for a moment, his gaze drifting over the empty chairs. Sometimes, he said softly, more to himself than to Dufresne, the greatest mysteries lie not in the crime itself, but in the people behind it. Dufresne nodded, his voice quiet. And it's those people we have to understand if we want to uncover the truth. Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes twinkling with quiet satisfaction. Indeed, Inspector, indeed.